TopMedTalk.
Hello and welcome to TopMedTalk. I'm Desiree Chappell, your host today. Now, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of evidence-based perioperative medicine, or EBPOM. We're a free global podcast with over 1.4 million downloads and over 1,000 podcasts, all focused on the broad topic of perioperative medicine. Now, joining me today is my co-host, our editor-in-chief of TopMedTalk and professor of anesthesia and critical care at the University College London, Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty.
Desiree, as always, it is great to be here. And I've got, after last week, which we'll come to in a second, which was a little bit grueling, I've got a spring back in my step.
It was the World Congress of Perioperative Medicine last week, because you had to hold the fort down in the studio in London all by your lonesome.
Due to no fault of anyone, just circumstances meant that I ended up being the sole anchor in the studio. I'll just say that one again, that could come out wrongly. Sole anchor in the studio in London. And it was actually pretty darn tiring, so no moaning, don't be a wimp. But well done, everyone, for pulling it off. We had about 2,500 active participants from 6 continents, and we had over 100 abstract submissions, and the finalists were just phenomenal.
Yeah, if you didn't have a chance to see the World Congress, which is fantastic. I mean, the presenters, the pre-records that we got to watch, people can still tune into that, right? Or at least get access to it?
Yeah, you can still buy a ticket to watch everything. So in other words, if you're in a low-resourced country around the world, there are codes to get you in for free. But if you want to watch all the pre-records and the whole thing again on demand for the next month or so, I think the tickets are extremely modestly priced. If you just want to go in and have a look if you want to go in and have a look around the poster gallery, for example, you can do that for free. You just have to subscribe, which also gets you our regular newsletter. But it's the posters, if I may, Desiree, I want to pivot off for this because although in the World Congress there was lots of discussions about the pain from COVID and all the sadness, there was a lot of the upside from the point of view of the rapid adoption of, connected health, yes, using big data, computerization, improved communication. And if we look at the 3 poster prize winners, number 3 was virtual surgery school. This idea that you get people together in a sort of virtual club room beforehand and discuss how you can make the outcome from surgery better for yourself by addressing some of your issues. Number 2 was the National Perioperative Quality Improvement Program in the UK, which was all about how to achieve the dream, drink, eat, mobilize, in thousands of patients with almost complete NHS coverage. And number 1 was virtual prehabilitation for cancer patients. So 1,000+ patient trial, whereby identifying patients using technology and data, they could change their outcomes. They did actually change their outcomes by supporting them with online exercise programs and wearables and better nutrition. And I think we're going to get into some of that in our discussions.
Yeah. So in addition to my role at TopMedTalk as managing editor and anchor, I also am vice president of clinical quality for NorthStar Anesthesia, which is a large anesthesia company here in the United States. Not only in the clinical quality world, but locally in Louisville, I am a staff CRNA. I'm also involved with quality there and involved with a lot of the different initiatives and programs that we're running through NorthStar, through Norton Healthcare. So the technology we're going to be discussing today that I've actually had a lot of involvement in is the surgical valet from Provation. And it is, again, this technology that we're able to see our patients prior to surgery. And hopefully we're going to hear a little bit more about this, Monty. So it's my pleasure to introduce one of the physician anesthesiologists that I work with at Norton Healthcare and through NorthStar, who has definitely led the charge on the surgical valet piece at Norton's, is Dr. Kari Beth Christie. You're a physician anesthesiologist, and your role there at Norton's and NorthStar is, of course, doing that piece, but you do so many other things at Norton's and for NorthStar. So tell us a little bit more about that.
I became heavily involved in the preemission testing department here a few years ago. And it was when our group received the contract with Norton, this was part of that process. In regards to really looking at the processes and the pre-admission testing and the patients and the optimization for the appropriate surgical procedures. So I've been heavily involved in the integration of the Provation system from the ground up. We have built this system and we have tailored it specifically to the certain surgical procedures that we have at Norton. We have also targeted specific patient comorbidities and conditions and utilize this technology to really take our pre-admission testing to the next level. So it started out where it was just basically an H&P clinic, or, the surgeons would bring in a list and have a ton of check boxes. They would order everything for every procedure. Didn't matter the risk associated with the procedure or take into account any of the patient comorbidities or specifics regarding or personalization of that. So we've really looked at that and tried to implement, with the help of the technology, a pairing of the technology helping the clinician make the appropriate testing choices for the patient as well as the procedure. It has really overhauled a lot of the normal processes and procedures with that implementation, taking it to another level.
I know it'll be much more complicated than the way I'm going to try and describe it, but is it like having a software application that you use on your work computer to help you process the patients and therefore guide you as to which are the most appropriate tests to do? I mean, I'm sure that's completely undermining how complicated it all is, but if I was sitting in the front of the computer, is that the way I'd be living the dream?
Yes, absolutely. It would integrate the information and then generate recommendations, which can then be reviewed by a clinician.
Are they customized by you, the recommendations, or does it come pre-informed that you're already almost all the way down the journey of making the right decisions when you load it up the first time?
It can be both. For us in particular, we have really went in and modified and changed and developed and really made it a system that is unique to us and provides the type of testing and the type of recommendations that we would like to see for our patients.
Let's dig in a little bit. And to do that, I want to bring in our second guest. We have Tiffany Beatty with Provation. She is Director of Customer Success. And she, I have to say, has really helped us through this process. Being a Director of Customer Success, she's really helped us to do that. Tiffany, thank you for joining us today. I know I introduced you. I think you've had a recent title change, though, haven't you?
Director of Customer Success is kind of where I started my journey with Provation. I've since moved into a clinical specialist engineer role, but still very much engaged with clients and looking at data and helping show and articulate the value.
Well, Tiffany has been great to hold our hands through this process and help make it go very smoothly. I kind of wanted to take a step back and talk about exactly kind of what PAT means or what it meant before surgical valet integration, because there are a lot of places around the world that probably don't even have the opportunity to see patients beforehand. And at Norton Healthcare, we had the luxury and we have the luxury of a PAT clinic. So Kari, can you tell us just a little bit more about the role of PAT and how that plays into the perioperative surgical experience?
PAT is really when we first contact the patient. We can find out a little bit more about their history, their comorbidities, and the technology. It can direct us as to what further needs to be done, or guess what doesn't need to be done. And it can also enable us to bring the appropriate patients in to be seen and evaluated. For low-risk patients that are pretty healthy, there's no need to bring them in or really do any kind of additional testing. However, for the higher risk patient that's having an intermediate or high risk surgery, well, yes, that's the patient that we want to bring in and be seen. So it enables us to direct us to the patients that we want to see in person and evaluate and take a further look at, and then to let those others that are low risk and healthy move on.
PAT, so pre-admission testing.
Correct.
That's before we used surgical valet. It was kind of like we brought everybody in that we could, right? But that was all driven by surgeons.
Right. It was all driven by surgeons, and it was a lot of the utilization of it was to be a surgical H&P clinic. So they would just bring the patients in and write write an H&P, and that was what would be utilized for the surgery, going into surgery.
Global audience, what's an H&P?
History and physical,
Gotcha.
that would, like within so many days, and which I believe is 30, is appropriate to utilize for the day of surgery.
Mm-hmm. It gives us the opportunity to see them and make sure we do the appropriate tests and things like that. Before we did surgical valet, we did not see every patient. Is that correct? Like PAT utilization was not, it's not 100% or even really close to that in some instances.
I think it was actually dictated by the surgeons. They would kind of decide who they wanted to bring in and be seen, and others would not. So very variable as to who presented to the PAT.
Yeah. And as you said before, it was just kind of a checklist, and they just say, okay, everybody gets, type and screened, everybody, gets a CBC and an x-ray and blah, 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 blah.
More of a standing order set.
Yes. Yeah. And our PAT clinic is driven by a nurse practitioner with a staff of nursing.
Correct. And before, however, it was a little bit separated into where there would be some patients that would be seen by the nurse practitioner, while others would just come to PAT and be seen by the nurses. So that was they were more working in, I would say, silos rather than an integrated collaborative approach, which we've moved to since.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we talk about kind of our experience there at Norton and what life looks like now, Tiffany, I wanted to take a step back and really tell us about the value of surgical valet, kind of, just start out what it is and how it brings value to what we're doing in anesthesia and perioperative medicine.
Sure. It's really seen as a care coordination platform, enhancing communication among the care team members. But then also, as Kari Beth mentioned and hit on, it's a clinical decision support system. So what it is in the background is we have a bunch of algorithms that we've been building for 10 plus years. And it's a way that we can really take in a patient's health history via the PAT nurse and take an objective look at them and give those recommendations that are very guided on their individual as comorbidities, health history, all of those sort of pieces of information. So instead of, some of the historical workflows, which were surgeon driven and might have been static order set driven, we're really looking to kind of revolutionize that workflow centered around a perioperative home model where all the care team members are involved and the patient's at the center of the care. So we're really directing the care that needs to be done specific to that patient.
Fantastic.
Monty, if I may, one of the questions that often comes back with these types of systems, which are absolutely in the future we're looking for, is if an institution is using your algorithms, who owns the decision, medico-legally, if you see what I mean? Who owns the final decision to do, which I'm sure is where all Kari Beth, all the extra work went in, because at some stage you have to make the tip over to Kari Beth owning the decision rather than Provation serving one up for her or the organization?
Excellent question. During the course of the implementation of the system, we do provide our clients with what the clinical decision tree looks like. They have absolutely every opportunity to give feedback on what that is. We help build in protocols that are specific to a facility. And certainly if there's any additional information or certain scoring mechanisms that you want to be included in that clinical decision tree, we include those as well. And that's one of the things that we've worked with quite a lot with Kari Beth and Norton, is just making sure that we've got all of their decision support tailored to their facility, certainly around the procedure risk, certain comorbidities that need to trigger certain testing. All of that has been an iterative process that we continue to kind of march down the path with Norton.
Yeah. And to address that, Monty, for you, what happens is Provation, the system will generate recommendations. Okay. And we know that generating recommendations, then they can be reviewed, and then the orders are put in, usually under the nurse practitioner, who is at the center of the PAT.
It levels the patient up and then decides who comes in, who doesn't come in. And one of the things that we always say is that they are a recommendation and kind of a framework guidelines, but ultimately the decision lies with the nurse practitioner and the providers on the ground to make those final decisions. So that is a really great question, Monty. One of the things that I wanted to talk about as well is all the data that we can get through Surgical Valet. Tiffany, can you kind of address some of that? Because, sometimes we live in like this data vortex and we can't always get a ton of data from our collaborating hospital, or if it's not exactly what we want. So how does Surgical Valet and Provation address that?
We have a lot of analytics in the background that we can help you analyze. So there are certainly some key metrics that we focus on, those being screening lead times, scheduling lead times, your cancellations and delay rates. And these are things that we've worked with Norton to analyze. The reason that these are important, certainly from a scheduling perspective, making sure that we're giving PAT enough time to do the job and the work that they need to do, contacting the patient, and helping that patient coordinate consults and testing, outside testing they need to be done. So we can have those metrics available to you all to have conversations with surgeons and partner facilities, just around what kind of lead times we're looking at. And then a screening lead time is the other really big one from an operational perspective, making sure that we're, not necessarily letting that case sit stale on the books once it's scheduled, making sure that we're addressing that phone call with the patient or that visit with the patient in enough time for that patient to have all those outside testing done. Certainly being able to risk stratify patients gives the nursing opportunity to kind of do more touch points with those patients who might be higher acuity. And so just trying to coordinate all of that. We provide those metrics back to you guys so you guys can see what you look like from an operational standpoint, just how your lead times are coming along. And then one of our return on investment values actually is cancellations. So intending to kind of organize all the testing, make sure it's all completed, organize all the documentation that you have to kind of put together for that case to try to mitigate things that are missing on the day of surgery is going to help impact those cancellations, impact day of delays, and keep your OR running efficiently on the day of.
Monty, one of the things that we've talked about is cancellation rates, and in the U.S., I believe it's like under 2% is what we're going for. I think there's always room to improve, especially depending on your patient population. I think that number can be greatly affected. Monty, is that a problem for you guys in the UK?
I think it's a problem everywhere in the world, but we had a big push over the last 10 years or so to try and make the same day cancellation a never event. So if it happens for whatever reason, it's a sort of board level reporting incident. Now that sounds very grandiose, if you sort of mean, but we do have a national health system. We can demand things across the country at a particular level and put resources in to deliver it. Now patients do get cancelled, but they very, very rarely get cancelled because of failure to prepare them adequately. The cancellation is usually these days because of lack of availability of a high care bed or theatre time or a surgeon or whatever it is, and we get heavily penalised for that as well. So I think it is achievable. Whether that level of resource investment is worth it ultimately is still a known unknown. But I think it's a standard that we would all aspire to. And then there's the more complicated thing, which we now got into, which I'm sure we'll discuss as well, is when it is right to delay the date of surgery and put somebody on a preparation pathway as opposed to being stale on a waiting list. That's, we talked a lot to people in the USA about that shift in the trend to say, actually, we're not going to do this until you're fully ready for elective surgery. Obviously, if it's scheduled or urgent, it's different, but sometimes prep time is good.
Kari, talk to us a little bit. I mean, we do talk a lot about this on TopMedTalk and EBPOM meetings, but the prehabilitation piece and how we are looking to use that, from the data and everything that we get from Surgical Valet.
Yes, absolutely. The more that we can create time in between when the case is booked, that we contact the patient and then the surgery is booked, that time can be utilized to ensure that the patient is in the best condition. So if it's a patient who is identified in PAT that has some anemia and could benefit from an iron infusion, we have time to coordinate that. If they're someone who's presenting for a joint replacement and their hemoglobin A1C is elevated, well, maybe we can create more time or delay the surgery a bit to achieve more glycemic control. So the sooner that we can talk to the patient, evaluate the patient, it will create time for optimization as well. And also, I think, too, as well, direct lines of communication between invested parties. So, for example, if we have someone who's scheduled for surgery that is seen and evaluated, determine that we need subspecialty consultation, like a cardiologist, having a direct line within the system to get that patient scheduled, to be able to obtain that consult in a timely manner, is, I think, very achievable when we create time by booking the case and then contacting the patient as soon as possible.
And may I ask, Kari Beth, how do you feel as though there's been an increased patient satisfaction with increased screening lead times? Less waiting around on the day of for additional testing, or just having that additional time to go do testing that's not stress-induced by a short lead time?
Absolutely. I think not only the patients are more satisfied with it, but the PAT nurses, the surgeon's office, the surgery schedulers, everybody is more satisfied with an increase in the lead time.
Sure.
Yeah, that's great.
And also, I will say something I think is down the pipe is it can give some time for some motivational interviewing. Some, like, for example, someone who needs to lose weight or quit smoking. The sooner that we can see and evaluate those patients, I think that's the trend towards perioperative optimization. I think they should really all be called perioperative optimization clinics rather than like pre-admission testing. How much time can we create that we can optimize the patient and specific to what's going on with that particular patient?
One more question kind of down this line is, what is surgical valet? How does that look for the different providers, the multidisciplinary team? So now instead of surgeons driving anesthesia, it's the anesthesia team. But it also looks very different for nurses and for patients as well. So Kari Beth, do you want to take that one? And then Tiffany, I'll let you kind of come in.
Well, I think that there's maybe a mix. Some surgeons are like, great, yes, take it. They're like, do whatever you all think and we'll be behind you. And then others still want to make their own orders and do their own order sets. And so it is a mix there. I will say that with this particular system, I feel more involved with the process and with the patients. And I think that's important for anesthesiology. Like, we should be involved in the patient. This is our domain, and how we can facilitate that within our facilities and with our surgical colleagues is of prime importance. I think this has helped us integrate us into the system and really have a seat at the table. And actually probably the top seat at the table.
Not just be the person who cancels the case because the right tests were, like that we've always gotten that misnomer and it's anesthesia's fault. When it's like, well, we really didn't optimize the patient beforehand. Well, what about for the nursing staff? I mean, this obviously had to be a big change in workflow and process. Tiffany, I'm actually going to ask you about this. When you go in and you're talking to a group about transitioning, what do you tell them when it comes to nursing?
This is one of the challenging things, is trying to change org behavior inside a department that has been running a certain way for some period of time. So we do talk to nursing about just allowing the system to do the work that it's intended to do. And we do make sure that we talk through being able to give feedback, the ability to do that additional communication inside the system, and to think about it as a tool in their toolbox so that they don't have to necessarily dig through a chart and make some of that tribal knowledge that might be living within the department. We try to put that all face up and available to them so that they're spending the important time speaking to patients and maybe a little less time doing digging inside the chart. And so that's really the value to nursing, is to try to get this some time back to do some direct patient contact, as opposed to, as I said, digging around that EHR chart. And so that's really the intent, is to be able to serve up to them a very perioperative focused history and decision support to support them in their role, to give them that additional time that they might need to speak to the patients directly. And from just speaking from an org change perspective, I know that it's certainly a difference in going from a surgeon-driven workflow to anesthesia having made the decisions on protocols and all of that. But I think we try to talk through, and I think Kari Beth's team is very good at it, continual feedback. My favorite is to say, don't suffer in silence. If there's something that's not going well in your workflow, reach out to us. If it's something that they disagree with, maybe from a recommendation standpoint, just keeping those lines of communication open, because nothing's set in stone. From the decision logic tree, we can always make adjustments with new information or just changing of the protocols as necessary. So that's kind of the conversations that we have with nursing is, just keep the communication lines open and see this as a tool in your toolbox.
And I will say that, like, at first when we started this, the nurses were very resistant. Just human nature, something new, don't want to do this. I'm not going to like this. It's computer, all this. We have about 0 complaints now. They like it. The system does the work for it. And then they see what happens. They're like, okay, that makes sense. I see why this was ordered, or this test was recommended, or this actually recommended a cardiac consult or a further evaluation. So you can, so they're actually have embraced it quite well.
Yeah.
I will say inside SurgicalValet, one of the things I think is of benefit for everyone who uses it is we do include the reason behind why recommendations are generated. So we do have a triggered by column in the view inside the application. You can see exactly what conditions for that specific patient triggered a recommendation. And I know we've talked a lot about tests and consults. We also generate patient instructions that are very specific to their medications list, their comorbidities, all of those same things that we would analyze for testing and consults. We provide individualized instructions on too. So instead of getting instructions that are coming maybe from a surgeon office, maybe medicine clinic, et cetera, all those different pieces of paper that a patient might have been managing, we try to bring those together too and give really directed preoperative patient instructions too.
Yeah, very specific. I love that piece with the patient engage. I think it helps with patient engagement for sure.
I'm just remembering that I think the technology in the background originally came from David Bergman, who we've interviewed in the past.
Yeah,
and he was an anesthesiologist. He still is an anesthesiologist, but he was a practicing anesthesiologist, one of our tribe, who was living in this world and thinking, come on, this is so last century. Can't we get the computers involved? So it is made by us for us, I think, is one of the interesting parts of the story. I think I'm right in that.
Yeah, you are. Dr. Bergman saw exactly as you illustrated the hole that was occurring, and some of the anesthesia being blamed for some of those cancellations, and thought, well, let's optimize the way that we're doing pre-anesthesia testing or pre-admission testing so that we're giving everybody a tool to really optimize patients.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about with Kari Beth was we've now been at this for a year. So what are some of the biggest changes that we've seen in our PAT clinics? I know you said people are pretty happy with it now, but from your vantage point of being so far deep in it, where have you seen some of the biggest changes?
Well, I think one is we are contacting nearly all the patients via phone call. And so that's kind of the first touch point there. Then, we put them through the system after we take the phone call, and then the patient's leveled. So it's level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 1, you're low risk, you're good to go. Level 2, we need to maybe, if there's something I need to send this to the nurse practitioner to review this chart and see if this patient needs to come in. And level 3, you're coming in to visit the nurse practitioner. So that's kind of how, and we have created that very specific for our group and our procedures through the help of Provation. So I think that we're bringing in the patients that we should, and we're not inconveniencing the patients that we shouldn't. I think we're ordering more appropriate tests for the patients that are either disease specific or procedural specific. I think that anesthesia, we are involved in this process more and have taken more ownership to it. And then I feel like that the surgeons are happy that we are engaged in this process. And then we're going to continue to improve it and optimize it. Again, at this point, I still feel like, we're bringing in the appropriate patients, we're testing is appropriate. Now we need to move towards optimization. Like that's our next kind of phase here at Norton that we want to look at.
We've definitely had lots of conversations about, next steps for that and pulling in our medical group colleagues and internal medicine folks and starting those conversations. It's like, well, we know we have all this data now. We know we can see our patients. How can we now collaborate in a different way and through all the consults that are generated, through all the information? How can we collaborate to do this better and optimize?
Absolutely. And I think too, that the patient's more engaged in the process as well. So even no matter what surgery that they're having, they will have spoken with PAT. And then we do have a process in place to where we try to contact them 3 times. And then if not, then we circle back around with the surgery scheduler and we're like, look, and the surgeon, we're like, look, we haven't been able to contact the patient. Either they'll reach out and have that patient contact PAT or the surgery's canceled.
Yeah.
So that helps.
Kari Beth, can I ask you, when you give somebody their level of risk, I mean, we rag rate by color. So, red, amber, green, for example, but it's the same theory. Do you have any or many people or very few people who turn around and are surprised at what level you put them at? I'm loading that question. So I think most people kind of think, I kind of know I'm a 2. Right, all right, but I really want to be a 1.
Right.
I want to stay away. But
I think the leveling's more used for the clinicians. Yeah. We don't really tell the patients or anything like that.
Yeah. But we can look at it and say, when, first glance, it's like, yeah, they're probably going to be this, and sometimes surprised one way or the other that they wouldn't be or they would.
Exactly. Sort of framing it in such a way that when you say you don't need to come in because you're fit and well, if anyone says you're joking, I'm terrible. Or that way. Anyway, I'm laboring the point. The other thing we were hearing at the World Congress, as the COVID has shifted a lot of people in around the world, but we were having lots of US-based discussions, is that the reimbursement, the attitude of CMS in particular, to reimbursement for virtual conditioning of patients and virtual vetting of patients changed during COVID-19, that from the point of view of making it work from the business perspective, that it now works in a way that was harder before.
It has really worked well, for us on we haven't gotten into the virtual space of pre-having people, but just the ability to call and have that first touch point. Wouldn't you agree? And
it's billable now as an activity in a way that there seemed to be. We were hearing that before. There was a kind of, if there isn't a physical visit, it doesn't count type of thing.
Yeah. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah. I mean, actually, it was kind of right when COVID started that this process started as well. So it actually led us perfectly into this, calling all the patients and talking to them first. And we were doing some virtual visits for a period of time. But I'm not sure about the reimbursement. There's so many prepackaged things now with CMS, like for the joints, et cetera, that you're just going to get a flat rate. So
yeah, all this is bundled into it, but the opportunity for growth in the prehabilitation space, I think is going to be great and a lot of potential there. Well, so Kari Beth, the other thing that I was going to say is as we wrap things up, wanted to address like the workflow, because I feel like in our experience together and some of the things that we've been able to uncover are issues that we had with workflow in the past. And again, that communication, that care coordination piece that maybe wasn't there before, we have a lot more conversations about if we do have somebody slip through the cracks, we have real-time data to go back and see, what happened. What are your thoughts on, and what do you think about that?
Yes. And I think once we see and evaluate the patient, our goal is to get the chart closed and ready for surgery as far out as we can. This kind of system, this workflow is improving it because we can also look on a board and we know where we're at. So you can look a day ahead, a week ahead, 2 weeks ahead, and you can see where are the patients that aren't ready. let's look at them. What is missing? What do we need for them? Have they been contacted? Is there a pending consult? Is there something that needs to be optimized that wasn't? Let's circle back around with the surgery and surgeon scheduler and say, hey, look, this is what's going on right now. We need to look towards this, or we need to delay this case. Great. So it's almost like a real-time process that helps us prevent and ensure that all the patients are ready for surgery in a timely manner.
Tiffany, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say inside SurgicalValet, as Kari's touching on, we do have patient tracking, essentially readiness tracking that has a bevy of filters for you to be able to do that targeted workflow. Let's say, for example, you're just checking to make sure that all those patients within a 3-day window have a negative COVID test. We have tasking to be able to filter for those cases, and just ways for that individual who's doing the chart checks or just really making sure that those final readiness steps are completed, for them to get a short truncated list to see what still needs to be done for each individual patient, as Kari Beth mentioned. We also have done some integration work with EHRs to push some of that messaging forward. I think is some of the work that we've done with Norton as well, is to push it actually into the EHR chart. Some notifications so that if a user is just looking inside the patient's chart inside the EHR, then they also can see it there. They have opportunity to see where that patient is, no matter whether they're looking in SurgicalValet, which is embedded in the EHR, or directly in that patient's chart too. So we certainly have integration options there.
Yeah, it works. It works really well. Again, that care coordination piece, everybody being on the same page for these patients is just crucial, and has actually been such a fantastic way, to take care of our patients. I'm sorry, Monty, did you have?
I just wanted clarity on that point, because this is all sounding wonderful. If my electronic health record, there are a number available. So we happen to have Epic, for example. Up the street is Cerner. Down the street is a house build of some form based on different products. If I'm going in there as a user, I turn my computer on in the morning and I'm in a familiar space. Is that right? I'm not going off to different boxes or different tablets, or it's just, as you say, it's fully integrated. It's another little thing to click, but my user experience is whatever the house product is.
Right. It's embedded right within the inherent EHR. There is a standalone app that can be used on any mobile tablet. So that's really handy to have the portable information in your pocket per se. But it is, if you are logging into your EHR, there is, as you said, a launch point right there. It's inherently in the EHR. The user is not having to bounce around. And we integrate into all of the major EHRs. So as you mentioned, Epic and Cerner, certainly all scripts, those types as well. So definitely have some deep integration.
I don't know where you are locally, Desiree, and Kari Beth, but we've kind of just got over the pain points of people knowing how to turn on the system and use it properly after a year or so. And so all those groans have gone away. So to introduce a new groan, you kind of want to reassure people that it's not that all over again. It's there's a few little quirks, but basically you've worked out how to switch it on. You've worked out how to get on there. You'll be fine. Yeah. Is that fair? Is it like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, again, when the PAT, we started this, they were like, ooh, and now they realize it's just a button that they push and the systems kind of talk to each other, and then it generates some recommendations. Yeah. Very, very easy to use.
Yeah.
That behind technology magic.
Yeah, it is. Once you've transitioned from writing and checking boxes with a pen and a piece of paper and transition to electronic medical records, your transition to doing something like this it's far less. Not a big deal. Well, as we wrap up here, Tiffany, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, wow, this sounds fantastic. And this would be great to have something, especially if someone doesn't have a full-blown PAT clinic, they can use something like this, or integrate it into existing clinics or pre-op areas. Technology and software like this that has a cost to it. But let's talk about the value of this system, SurgicalValet, and the return on investment. You mentioned that earlier. What are some of the things that if we want this at our shop, like how do we talk to our key stakeholders about it?
So from a return on investment metric perspective, we always look at cancellations, delays, length of stay, and the like. So I would say that first and foremost, having a chat with the OR director, the PAT clinic director, the anesthesia group, and getting a feel for where everyone feels like they stand current state. Most of the time we'll reach out and we'll actually do a return on investment analysis based upon those metrics that I'd mentioned. So if people are interested in doing that, you can get a hold of us through Provation website. Otherwise, definitely talking to your OR director about where you guys are today and now, where you'd want to be. We can help target the kind of improvement that you'd want to see. And then also our customer success team supports clients long-term. So that's post-implementation, which is kind of where we are with Norton right now, continuing to go back in and do quarterly and reviews, certainly quarterly reviews, more routine touch bases on that return on investment metrics, but also the operational metrics that we mentioned earlier. So we create a lifetime relationship, if you will, with you guys to keep you really informed of where you guys are from a return and an operational standpoint.
Yeah, I was going to ask Kari Beth, just knowing the answer to this question, but a lot of technology and different things that we use, especially in anesthesia, but in the surgery world, like it's kind of dropped on our laps. We say, hey, this is what you're going to use because it's the newest and greatest, and then we never see anybody from support teams or anything like that. That's not been our experience at all. And in fact, Kari Beth, I think we're on the phone or in email, asking, just questions about ways we can, do it better. Our experience has been great support staff.
Yes, absolutely. I've never had an issue. And, again, you can refine this type of system as much as you want or as less as you want. And we've refined it and we continue to refine it and make it applicable and usable for us and up to date as well. And I'll also point out as well, there's a lot of financial implications for unnecessary testing. So that's another point that you could take to the administrators and stuff. Could this system save you money by decreasing the amount of unnecessary tests for the patients? And that we know too, that sometimes unnecessary tests provide results that lead to further investigation and you go down a rabbit hole that further leads to delay of care for the patient. So I think that's another point as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've certainly done some research and study for specifically cancellations. An average cancellation costs a U.S. hospital about $4,500. So if you think about how many cancellations your facility might be seeing today and now and extrapolate that across, it's almost, the value is almost inherent simply because we're looking to decrease that. And as you said, you can take that to your administration and just kind of take a look at the rough numbers and see, that's probably would be a good fit. And as Dr. Christie mentioned, the decrease in testing, but also increase in consults potentially. There's certainly other inherent return on investment outside of just cancellations that the system provides. So we do a deep dive into those sort of metrics with prospects.
Dr. Christie, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us today to have this discussion. I think, it's been a great experience so far for us locally and looking forward to really kind of getting in now that we have it implemented and rolling and refined pretty well. We can really start to get into that space of, optimizing our patients beforehand. We're looking forward to that. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to talk with us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for having us today.
Great to meet you.
TopMedTalk.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks for listening to TopMedTalk and this fabulous conversation. Again, thanking our guests, Dr. Christie and Tiffany, and look forward to future conversations about this, where we are in a year to see, how we've grown, because I anticipate with all the things that we have in the works that we're definitely going to see some growth there. If you want to hear more conversations on any podcatcher and on TopMedTalk.com. So be sure to check that. Thanks so much for listening and have a fabulous day.